There we are. We're live. Hello. Welcome, everybody, to our Women Through Time panel, our final event for Independent Bookstore Day. We are joined by four fantabulous is the word that came to my brain. Fantabulous authors. Don't know if it's the best word, but there it is. Who will be talking to us about their books and time and other great concepts and ideas. Okay. So we're going to get started just with some quick introductions. I'm going to start with Juliet Claiborne Johnson. You want to kick us off?
That's me. They said I could read my bio off of my book. Here it is. Juliet Claiborne Johnson grew up on a farm in Tennessee, so she knows exactly what a peacock in a barnyard full of chickens looks like. After college in Virginia, she moved to New York City, where she worked at Mademoiselle and Glamour magazines before marrying her comedy writer husband and moving to Los Angeles. They have 2 children who are living at home with us again now. So that's me.
Excellent. Then I think Ryan is going to go next.
Hi, guys. I'm Ryan Graudin, and I am a Charleston native. I write mostly young adult novels. I currently have 6 books on the shelves, the latest of which is Invictus, and it is basically pitched as Doctor Who meets Guardians of the Galaxy. So it's about a crew of time-traveling thieves who has to go back and pull heists from items in history that won't be missed. So, for example, one of the first heists they pull in this book is on the Titanic, and they have to go steal the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, which was a beautifully bound, jeweled book, and they have to get it before the ship sinks. But, of course, that all goes wrong. So, spoilers. So that's a short intro of me.
Excellent. And Juliet, why don't you go next?
I'm going to steal Julia's trick, and I'm going to read the bio on the back of my book. I literally, every time I have to give a bio, I think, what do I say about myself? As if
I know. It's embarrassing. It's like dating all over again.
It is, every time. Anyway, apparently, I was born in Hartford, Connecticut, and grew up in a tight-knit Italian-American family. A book editor, I am the associate publisher of Soho Press and the curator of the Soho Crime imprint, which is true. That's behind me there. But this is my novel, The 7 or 8 Deaths of Stella Fortuna, which is a story about 100 years in an Italian-American family that follows basically 5 generations of women from their origins in the deep, deep south of Italy, in a region called Calabria, and through emigration to the United States, 2 world wars, courtship and family drama and all kinds of stuff like that. And it's mainly about 2 sisters and the love and the friction between them. And I'm not a South Carolina or Charleston native, but I did have the great privilege of visiting Itinerant Literate in person last year. And I just love the bookstore so much. And I'm so honored to be here today. So thank you for inviting me.
You're so welcome. And thank you. All right. And Margarita, if you close us out.
Hi, everybody. I'm Margarita Montimore. I am the author of Oona Out of Order. My first novel was self-published, and this was my traditionally published debut. To modify my author bio, I was born in Soviet Ukraine and grew up in Brooklyn. I now live in New Jersey with my husband and dog. And I worked in publishing and social media for over a decade and then decided to scrap the whole thing and focus on writing full time. So pretty much I'm living my dream. And, it's been amazing with Oona Out of Order. It was a Good Morning America book club pick, and just seeing the response it's gotten it's really been so surreal and incredible. In a quick nutshell, the book is about a woman who we first meet in 1982, right as she's about to turn 19, and then in Brooklyn. And then on New Year's Eve, when the clock strikes midnight, she is transported over 30 years into the future, into 2015, into her 51-year-old body. And then every year, she leaps into her own body at a different random age. So she lives her adult life out of order.
And it is such a fascinating book. Thank you guys all for those quick introductions and joining us tonight. We're really excited to talk to you about sorry, we're really excited to talk about your books and your process and take questions from the audience. So yes, everyone who's viewing us on YouTube, you can ask questions in the chat feature. So please do write in your questions there. We'll keep track of them and we'll have them at the end to ask everyone as the final question and answer session. All right, so we're going to get started. And the first question, since we are taking the topic of time as like the main theme here, I wanted to ask how, like as part of your writing process, did you conceptualize time as either, specifically a timeline or how it would work in your book? So I'd love to hear from everyone about it. Maybe we could start with, who will I pick on? Maybe Ryan first this time.
Sure, why not? Yeah, so most of my novels are very high concept, and I love playing with just big ideas like alternate history or portal fantasies or, et cetera, et cetera. So I really wanted to do a time travel novel, mostly because I'm just super obsessed. I've always been really obsessed with history, even though I didn't have I had pretty terrible history teachers actually in high school. My honors US teacher, she thought wars were icky, so she skipped all of them. So we basically we just studied the Roaring '20s and had to dress up like flappers for a school project. Anyway, so but my love of history survived despite that, mostly because of reading. And so I really wanted to write a novel where my characters could time travel the way I want to time travel and just go back to like the really cool and also tragic parts of history and be eyewitnesses to it. So I had characters, like I said, they go to the Titanic. They also go to like the Burning Library of Alexandria, and they go, to like ancient Rome, and they get to see all these things, which of course meant that I had got to research all of them, which I'm a little nerdy about. I really enjoyed doing that. So yeah, my approach to time was very broad and sweeping and kind of just go out all throughout the known history and explore. Yeah.
All right, cool. Juliet, would you tell us a little bit about yours?
Sure. I mean, my book is fairly straightforward, chronological, so I don't think my answer is going to be nearly as interesting as Margarita's, which I just can't wait to hear. But I will say that so it is set over 100 years, so there's a lot of historical. I had to do a lot of research like Ryan, and I love research like Ryan. So Ryan can compare notes. I think researching, basically writing a book is an excuse to do all of this really nerdy research.
Exactly.
So I did a lot of that. And I think for me, for the historical details, in order to bring another period of time to life, you have to be conscious of more than, did this actually happen? Is this actually believable? I think that it involves drilling down to things like, are the adjectives that I'm using appropriate for this chronology, or would the character be familiar with that concept? Because even if the character is not the narrator, you don't want to throw the audience out of that moment by making them have a kind of aesthetic, friction between their ideas and what they're reading. And so for me, getting time right meant editing again and again and again and going back and just interrogating every word of every sentence a lot. So that's my answer. Interrogation.
So stark. Oona. Oh my gosh, Margarita, I'm going to keep calling you Oona. I don't know why. I think it's just for some reason I feel like you look like the cover of the book too. I don't know. Yes, please tell us how you worked out your timeline, because it was the out of orderness seems tricky.
Oh gosh. And then when I tell people I didn't really outline the story and kind of just wrote it, then it's like, wow, how many straitjackets did you go through for this book? And like, did you have a murder board covered in like pins and string? And I actually, what kept me sane was keeping 2 timelines, and they were very simple, just each a page or 2, one in chronological order. So like from the year that Oona was born, which would have been, I think, 1964, all the way through to like the last year that I wrote about in the book. So, and not every year had anything necessarily written, but it was so that at a glance I could see like, okay, any key events that happened that year in her life, and also the leap and the age that she is on the inside and outside. So I had just the way time normally flows for all of us ordinary human beings. But then I also had Oona's timeline so that I could see the order that she was living her adult life. So, okay, so that's 2018. She's 19 on the outside, 52 on the outside, 19 on the inside. And then after that, it's this year, so that I could kind of compare the two and see what has she lived through? What does she know? What have the people around her, like, what do they know so far? Because, you know, there are certain things that, you know, like she kind of finds out over the course of her life completely non-sequentially. And then there's also the fun historical aspect of that, because, you know, I am a fan of the 80s. I wrote initially the same thing as you, Ryan, that it was like, what's a time travel story that I would be excited by, or eras that I would like to go back to. And so, I mean, the day they build a time machine, I'm going back to the 80s, like first thing, like just sign me up. And then it just turned out that as the story went along, that I actually spent more time in the 90s and the 2000s and 2010s. So it really was 4 decades of her life, and also 4 of the last decades of pop culture and history. And for me, the challenge was incorporating enough detail that it gave a flavor of, you know, what 1991 would be like versus 2003, but not overwhelm the book, because you really have to pick and choose. And then on top of that, you know, she's very savvy in terms of investing in the stock market, because she knows which stocks are going to pay off, because that's the one really great advantage of time travel. And my editor encouraged me to actually do the research on the stocks. And for me, like, again, nerd alert, it was challenging, because figuring out all of the math and inflation and the splits, like, that was not super like easy for me, but I did it. And but it was really interesting to see, like, okay, so what would have been the best stocks to invest in, and when should she have sold them? And if she's giving somebody stock advice in this year, what would be the companies she'd recommend to them? And so it was really fun. And then, like, the eras that I was in a little bit more detail, like the early 90s club kids scene, that for me is just one of my personal kind of fun eras to kind of not reminisce about, but just kind of do my own research about. So it was like rereading books I already read and watching documentaries I already watched. So it never feels like homework if you're researching the things that you have a genuine interest in, but doing a cross section of several decades, it was fun, and definitely had its challenging moments.
Margarita, where did you get the idea? I'm sorry, I just have to know.
Oh, no, it's fine. I was like nearing 40 and not having the easiest time of it, and kind of having those moments where I would wake up and be like, God, I still feel like I'm 19 on the inside. And how's this album I listened to when I was a sophomore in high school now, like, celebrating its 25th or 20th anniversary? And then it just sort of got me thinking about that disconnect of, like, you know, sometimes you wake up and you feel like you're 100 on the inside, and it's like, oh, well, what if that did happen? And, you know, what if it was because, you know, she lived her adult life out of order? And then kind of all of these time travel tidbits, because I've always been like Goldilocks with time travel stories, that, you know, I appreciate so many of them, but something was always not exactly the way I would have, like, well, these aren't the years that I would have liked, or how come it's more men get to time travel than women, and why is it always about saving the world? Why can't it just be about trying to live your life, and how complicated that would make relationships, and, you know, just everyday things. So it was kind of this amalgam.
Yeah, because you know what? I grew up in the time you guys are talking about, because I'm ancient, but my daughter's 20. And I have some of my most precious clothes, not a lot, but from then. And every now and then she'll go into my closet and take them and wear them around. I'm like, there it is. It's like coming back. So it's very poignant to me. The 80s, you know, I was there. So the clubs, My
Oh,
friends went.
I was born 10 years too late. I at least had fun in the 90s, but yeah, that was my way of kind of revisiting, because I have grown past those club years and those crazy times. So it was a way to like revisit. And I think that's kind of the beauty about writing different eras that, let's be honest, if we actually went to those times, it would not be as fun as we would probably imagine it, but we get to pick and choose the aspects of those periods that are fun to kind of see again.
Yeah, and I think we all feel like we're still 19 inside.
Yeah.
I do, and I'm not. So anyway, but I digress.
Well, Julia, will you tell us about your process?
Yeah, does not have a time travel aspect in it, except one of the characters is about a kid who's obsessed with the 1920s and 30s, but it takes place in 2009. So, but I had to have a timeline of like when everything happened, just so it was at a very scientific system. It was on an index card like this. It had lines drawn across it, and like, JFK dies, all that kind of stuff. I should have dug it out for this. But even though he didn't travel through time, I had to go like, no, wait, would that have happened at that point? And he really dresses like somebody from yesteryear. And it's like he exists outside of time in a way that most kids who are, he's 9, nobody can relate to him because they don't understand what he's doing. So he has no friends his own age. So in that sense, it's a time travel-y kind of thing, but not really. But man, the 1930s and all that, like, it's interesting because people are like, you must have done a ton of research. Well, I did some, but he's on the spectrum, but I never say it because I don't want to say that he's on the spectrum. But the woman who is his caretaker at this time is trying to teach him how to tell jokes so that the bullies won't beat him up. And that, I know so many jokes. I mean, it's just dumb jokes are my favorite thing. Like the first joke is my favorite dumb joke. Horse walks into a bar. The bartender says, "Hey, buddy, why the long face?" I love that joke. But he can't understand it, like that. He doesn't get what the joke is. And then also we live in Hollywood. And so I know way too much Hollywood trivia from that. So I was able to put that in. And then, there's some other thing. Oh, and I used to write fashion copy. So I knew a lot about clothes based on that. And I would look at the people who came to me, the copywriter, and say, they'd explain the story, and I'd look at them and go, man, you must have just gotten the crap beat out of you in middle school. But then once they're grown up, everybody wants to be them because they're different. They're like the trendsetters. So it's all about how being different is a curse when you're little, but then it is the thing that saves you when you're older. Well, that is not an answer to your question at all, but there it is. So
speaking of that, though, who here had a good time in middle school? Raise your hands.
I was literally the worst years of my life. Like,
I think
no doubt.
Time travel, I don't ever want to revisit middle school, and I will never write a middle grade or young adult novel for that reason. Ryan, how do you get through it? How do you do it?
Oh, well, so I was actually homeschooled for middle school because my mom, she intentionally was like, okay, this will not be a good experience. So she took me out. So I actually had a pretty magical, I would finish my schoolwork by like 11 in the morning. And then I would just go and like bike around the neighborhood and run feral in the woods and just like kind of bridge to Terabithia-esque. So yeah, that's how I got through it.
So that's why she's happy to revisit that.
Yeah.
This is great. I love that y'all are asking follow-up questions to each other. This is wonderful. Okay, so I think this was sort of touched on maybe a little bit, but for those of you who have a book that took place prior to 1950, what was it like writing the female characters from then, whether or not they were the protagonist or a supporting character or whatnot? I mean, how did you get into that viewpoint? Because I think a lot of us think of that era being quite different for women than it is today, or maybe not. Maybe there's a debate there.
What about Juliet?
Yeah, Juliet.
So my book is very much about the Italian immigrant phenomenon. It action kind of starts in 1915 and it covers 100 years. And there was this, if you know Italian American history at all, there was just this huge wave of people, perhaps 5 million people who fled the south of Italy during this time because it was, all these historical factors and just total abject poverty. And but because of visa restrictions that became more and more acute over the course of the 1920s and then on, men would be able to come in when they had work visas, if they had a history here, but they really tended to leave their wives at home. And so either because they had to or because it was more, more practical. So you had this extreme Catholic patriarchy that for years had been, women were not citizens in Italy until 1945. They couldn't vote or hold property or control money or anything like that. And they were literally, you're owned in the Rocco law code, which was codified by Mussolini. You're actually owned by your husband, and the father of a family owns his children. So it's like at the same time, we have about a third of the families in southern Italy suddenly have no men in them because the men are emigrating to try to make money. And you have a world of women. You have mothers who have never had any power and they have to run everything. And they've had often no education because that wasn't prioritized, and they have to figure things out. And yeah, they're super creative and hardworking and they have tons of chutzpah, but they also have to kind of carve the territory for themselves. And I really wanted to tell that story because I had read a lot of wonderful immigrant sagas about the people who actually make the voyage, but I hadn't really ever found the stories about the people who were left behind and how they functioned in the absence of a legal breadwinner. And I thought that was just fascinating, like looking at what women's lives were. And I think for me, one of the big challenges was this was a very illiterate time. So my grandmother was born in Calabria in 1920, and she emigrated in 1939. And one of the characters in the book kind of follows the beats of her life. And I knew her background. She never learned to read her whole life. And in her family, like her husband only learned to read and write when he was 14, and he was here in the States already working on the railroad. So I was trying to collect women's stories that had never been written down. And I was relying on people in their 80s and 90s for oral histories. And I just had to do tons and tons of interviews, and things that they told me seemed really unbelievable because of the extremity of life when things are this precarious and poor and when people have to be this creative to survive. But as I did more and more research, I found that they were borne out by archival research or by photo research. I used a lot of things like recipes were a huge source of women's history for me because they were passed down orally through generations, but they're kind of a form of literacy because they would preserve what was available at a certain time of year, how women would have to execute it, what percentage of their day would be spent, rendering something or, chafing something or whatever it was they had to do to the product they were working on. And folk songs and proverbs became really important. And through these little bits and pieces, I tried to reconstruct this period that hasn't been written about from these voices that hadn't been written about. And it was an awesome experience. I will say that I finished this book. It came out last May, so way before COVID. But I have gone back to the research again and again to find solace during this really weird time. To be like, they had nothing and they got through it, and it was tough. And they were so resourceful. They grew their own food. They ate more simply. It's inspiring, and I really like to think about it. So
Juliet, you have me so curious, and I know what you mean about like the stories that people tell that just sound so unbelievable, because my mother has like 100 stories like that, and one of these days I need to sit down and write a book about her. But like off the top of your head, can you name like one or two examples of something that it would have been hard for you to believe somebody lived through and that kind of experience?
So my book is fiction. It's a novel, but the origin point was the fact that my grandmother actually had 8 near-death experiences she actually had 10, but I used 8 of them in the book. The 7 or 8 deaths of Stella, Fortuna, these were all things that happened to my grandmother over the course of her life. And when I first heard them, I thought there's no way a person couldn't survive this. So the most extreme example that I thought they must have been exaggerating about if anyone in the audience is squeamish, plug your ears, but then also don't read my book because my book is very graphic. She was actually, I think 5 or 6 years old, and she was feeding the pigs that they owned in her yard, and she had a piece of bread to give the pigs, and for whatever reason she did not let go of the bread. She just like stubbornly held on to it instead of giving it to the pigs, and the pigs trampled her, and they split her abdomen out and her intestines popped out. And there was no doctor in their village. There was no running water, no electricity. There was not even a road to lead to another village. So I was like, you don't survive your intestines popping out of your body. Like, that doesn't work. The only antiseptic they had was lemon. They would grow lemon and they would use it to clean things. So I was like, it just doesn't. Like, it doesn't happen that way. When I took a leave of absence from my job and went to my grandmother's village to interview people there. And there was a 93-year-old woman who, without any prompting, was like, oh, your grandmother, she's the one who with the intestines. And then she's like, I was the one that day who found her and I had to go I was like, oh my God. It was just like, it had actually happened. It was not an old wives' tale. And so.
Wow.
There are others, but I've taken a lot of time, so I don't want to take more. But it's incredible what women did. I'll just say that.
My father grew up on a farm, as did I, and the pigs killed his pony when he was a little boy, and so no pigs were ever allowed on our property because they're so huge.
They are, and tough, right?
And tough, and they're like, "Don't get in my way, or I'll eat you." So. But then we eat them so it works out. So.
I did not realize that pigs were so violent. I'm going to be honest.
Sometimes they are, yeah.
Wow. Ryan, for your time travel book, when you, for example, when they're heisting the Titanic, did you have to do anything different when you were writing the female and male characters, or do you try to kind of not do that sort of thing for younger audiences?
I think to an extent, the main character who pulls the main heists in Invictus, he's male, so he can get away with a lot. He's also white, so he can get away with a lot. But the other people in the crew, there's the Priya, she's a medic, and then Imogen, who is the main character's cousin, she's the historian, and so she's the one who does all the research before the heist, and she gets their costumes together, and she makes sure that everything is they don't ruffle feathers basically while they're there, because they're not only trying to keep time in order, but they're also doing this illegally in their own time, and so they don't want to draw any suspicion from any authorities. So there is a main character who is a girl who does go back and forth, but she's also trying not to ruffle any feathers. So I didn't really have to push the envelope or really show women's struggle in this book. But I have in other books with Wolf by Wolf, and I have a main character who she is in an alternate version where the Nazis won the World War, and she has to go in a motorcycle race and compete with a bunch of boys. And so that kind of delves into how women had to really kind of buck against any woman who wanted to really make something of herself or put herself in the forefront of history, really had to break the rules and disguise herself as a boy to get things done. So that's a common theme in several of my other books as well.
Yeah. And then Julia, I know Be Frank With Me obviously doesn't take place, farther back, and also the Frank is a male, but you do have a new book coming out next spring that does take place a little farther back in time, in the 1930s.
Can I say something about this thing though that we're talking about, which is his mother, Frank's mother, wrote a novel when she was 19 that was it was like Catcher in the Rye, or oh my God, To Kill a Mockingbird. And people were like, oh, did her brother write that book? Her brother died. And so there was conspiracy theories that she couldn't have written it because she was a woman, and she was so mad about all of it. So anyway, but yes, the new one is and I got the advanced copies yesterday. So this is what they look like. Very exciting. But it's about in real life, my father during the Depression worked on a divorce ranch in Reno, Nevada, where rich ladies would go and stay for 6 weeks while they become Nevada citizens, and then they could get a quickie divorce I thought everybody knew this was a thing. Apparently they didn't.
No.
So, and he was handsome and he could dance and he was charming and he had a wacky Southern accent. So, Juliet, you're very excited, I can say. So it's like fun. And I just wanted to be, after my husband read it, he said, it's kind of Nancy Mitford. And I was like, oh my God, I was so excited because, she's so funny. And in it, like there's like a character who arrives, I'm going to spoil it. She arrives by plane. She flies herself to Reno and she gets out of the plane. And the guy looks at her and thinks she's a boy until she takes off her helmet. And then he's like, oh my God, it's a woman. And he's in the position of being like the girl. He's like a chorus girl because he'd been a smart guy. He was at Yale and pre-med and then they lost everything. He had to get this job. So he's stuck in that position that the women are always stuck in where you're just judged for your outsides and nobody could believe he was smart because he talked funny. And I was like, oh my God. So this is delicious to me. So, and then all the ladies are just there killing time with him and the other people on the ranch.
It's a whole new spin on the dude ranch.
Well, did you ever see the old women, the women that Claire,
Yes.
because everybody used to go, like all the movie stars, don't get me started. I'll talk about this forever. But everybody went to Reno to get divorced or they went to Hot Springs, Arkansas. And so it was really a thing. And then it got to be easy to get divorced and people didn't do it anymore. But I think
it's so interesting because I remember hearing, like in the women and I think I just remember like older movies, they'll just mention like going to Reno for a few weeks. And I always found that so curious that it was just said in passing, but to actually offer a glimpse into what that entailed and, what that kind of very, very specific period in time and very specific place looks like, that sounds really interesting.
Well, the Depression, I will not talk about this forever, but they had like, you've heard of the Dust Bowl and like there was a nationwide drought. And so a lot of the cattle died off of cattle ranches. And somebody was like, we've got this ranch. They're rich ladies who need to be here for 6 weeks. Let's do it. And so then they would like movie star it up. So it looked fancier. Like it looked more like a movie person's idea of what a ranch was like than what a real ranch was like. And all the guys were really handsome. So part of the guy's job interview is he has to take his shirt off for the guy's interview. And I was like, what's it like, pal? So.
Wow.
And none of this, I don't know anything about my father's experience because he never really talked about it except to tell funny stories about it. But, he had a rich first wife and now I realize, he met her there because where did he meet a rich lady? So the stories are endless. I'm stopping now or I'll go on.
That is so fascinating.
I cannot
It'll be fun.
I know. Yeah. And then Margarita, I mean, obviously Oona Out of Order doesn't take place that far back, but how did you have to think at all about her going so far forward in time for that first jump, especially? And like the relation with her and her boyfriend at the time when she leaves him, that was an interesting part of the book. I don't know. How did you?
Yeah. I mean, as far as like kind of the gender roles go, I think there's, considering it's more contemporary, there's a little bit more, I think, with the relationship with her mother, who had her when she was really young. I think she was like 17, and she had to kind of like leave her career. So there is a little bit of that contrast of, Oona, feeling kind of like, how am I ever going to have a normal life? And, like her opportunities have been cut short a little bit because she doesn't get to live a sequential life that everybody gets to live. Whereas, her mother she basically abandoned her career to start a family and to be a wife. And, so kind of like looking at the different personal sacrifices people make voluntarily versus, the circumstances that we just are given and have to make the most of. But yeah, there's definitely also that kind of power dynamic, I think, with her earliest boyfriend and kind of being a little bit more assertive and sort of the leader of the band and her kind of following along. But then as the story progresses, finding her own kind of agency and her making her own kind of choices and realizing the things that she went along with it, this time she wouldn't. So there is that question of when, the two of them kind of meet up again, is it going to work? And, with like one person experiencing all of this growth and change and, how could you kind of pick up where you leave off when you're not the same people?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. This is sort of a divergent question, but it came up when y'all were talking about your research. And I was just wondering, have you all saved your research from your book? And like, would you save it forever or would you ever throw it away? Or have you already thrown it away?
I have giant boxes down here. It's the boxes your paper comes in. And I've used the paper and then I've put the stuff, like the stuff in there very carefully. Because your archives are going to want that someday. Would they have the library for you? Don't you think? I mean, come on.
I love the way you think.
It's hysterical.
I'm gonna take that and run with that.
I think I need to stop writing books because the underneath of the bed here is full and the underneath of the desk is full. Because you don't want to throw anything away. You might need it someday. Like I totally could have found that timeline if I had thought to look for it ahead of time.
I am not that organized. I am so I look things up. So my archives would be like a Google search history and this thing I watched on Netflix and this book that I read on my tablet and this other book I happen to have a hard copy of. So it's very, it seems willy-nilly, but it's very much kind of like in the moment of, all right, what year with 2004. Okay, let me read all about 2004. Pick out like the key parts. Let me read about like the stock market, and so that's. I mean, I'm a pack rat in so many other respects, like just book hoarding in general. If it was a matter of research on top of it, that would be pretty intense. But actually, the book that I'm working on now, I'm finding it is nice to be organized, at least digitally. I use Scrivener. And so I have this like little file cabinet and then the book itself is written in all different formats. So I have to kind of keep it straight in order to have like some kind of coherence and order. So as I come across something, when can you declare somebody legally dead if they've been missing in this state? I found like a PDF and I was like, you know what? Instead of just keeping this tab open on my laptop in my browser for the next 6 months, I'm actually just going to download it, file it away. And it was like, oh, this is so much easier. Or like looking at formats that other books have used that tell a story through, an oral history or letters, epistolary novels, things like that. I don't think it's necessarily something. I don't know that A, people would be that interested, or B, that I totally want people in my messy brain that I want to subject them to that. But I am trying to kind of create a little more order amid the chaos.
Yeah, man, if a homicide detective got any writer's computer, they would be convinced that you're still, how long does it take this to decompose?
Yep.
What's the law about so-and-so,
Yep.
So.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Ryan.
Oh yeah. Well, I was just going to say that my process is much more like Margarita's in that I had actually never seen Titanic until I had to start writing that scene. Start writing those chapters, and I was like, I should probably watch that movie. And so I've read a lot of books and done all of those other things, but that was the first time I had sat down and watched that movie in full. It was for research for that. But I also I have a book coming out in January that's a middle grade that I've co-authored with one of my good friends, Amy Kaufman, and it's set in a portal world where everything that's lost ends up there. So we had to do a lot of research on historical figures like Queen Nefertiti and Amelia Earhart and the Lost City of Z and Percy Fawcett.
Oh, fun.
So to do research together, we basically kind of assigned each other characters or cities or civilizations. And we had this giant Google document that we went through and kind of did the entries we basically wrote little essays and reports on stuff so that we had this one document while we were writing that we could really reference. So that's probably the most orderly any of my notes for any of my books have ever been.
Okay, I'm gonna ask one more question on this because we do have a few questions from the audience that I wanted to make sure we have time for. And so since we're on this like topic of like divergence, so some of you guys have written fantastical or sci-fi fiction and others realism. Would you ever consider writing the reverse of what you've written?
Ooh, I don't know if I would, because for me, it helps to have established rules. And that's probably from my days as a copywriter, because you had to, like, if this is like 1902, basically, they'd give you like a block of fake copy and you had to make it fit the space. And it made it so much easier because it kept you from going on tangents. And if anything is possible, everything's possible. Like, how do you not write a 40,000 page book? So that's my hot take.
I love speculative fiction. I love sci-fi and I love fantasy separately. I read a lot of it. It's like my fun go-to. And I hold it in really, really high respect. And I'm not sure that at this moment I have the chops to pull off something I think you have to be conscious of world building. You have to be conscious of science concepts. And there's a lot. And the genre is really richly read, and readers have very high expectations. So it would not be a task that I would tackle lightly. But I hope someday I could. I actually have one idea that has been bubbling for like 10 years, and someday I'll feel like I have the energy to try it. I don't know. But.
I am still kind of baffled that I even wrote a time travel book, because my stuff tends to be and even this book, it's technically not sci-fi because the cause of the time travel is never explained. If I even just wrote one sentence saying, oh, it was a virus, then that it would have like officially be considered time travel. So yeah, it's more kind of, it has that speculative edge, but so I don't really know what the opposite of my genre would be, because the kind of, I guess one of my biggest challenges has always been that I will not quietly succumb to one genre. And, the book I self-published, I had people call it, it has psychological suspense, it has a bit of romance, it has some mystery, it's like book club fiction. So the fact that I was able to get away with something like Oona that has different elements and still kind of coheres into a story and, can sit on a bookshelf without kind of people being confused about where to put it. I'm kind of determined to keep writing stories that, will not, quietly adhere to one genre all the time. So, so I guess maybe the opposite of that would be writing a story in one single genre. For me, I'm up to any challenge, but I guess I find that when there are very strict rules for what that is supposed to be, like a romance has to have a happy ever after, or, a mystery has to follow certain beats, a thriller does. My first impulse is to think about how can I subvert it. So, maybe I would do that, but it would only be if I could find a way to put a unique spin on it in a way that isn't going to also piss off the readers who love that genre, because otherwise, why bother? So I'm open.
Yeah, it sounds like you could describe yourself as genre bending.
Yes.
Yeah.
Anytime I see a book that is described as genre bending, immediately I'm like,
you're like,
tell me more. Yeah.
Yeah. That's my crack. Yeah. So I actually majored in creative writing in high school and college because I went to an art school and all of that stuff. But the teachers they did not like genre fiction. And that was what I loved reading. Obviously, like I grew up on like Nancy Drew and Harry Potter and Redwall and all of these like stories that really just took me out of the life I was living so that I could like go on these wide adventures and anything was possible. And that's really what I loved about books. And so I feel like I really was forced to hone in on craft and like sentence structure and like all of the basic stuff while I was in school. But as soon as I was done, I was like, okay, let me at all of the sci-fi, fantasy, historical, genre bending, anything. And I was like, I will never write a contemporary or like, a non-magical story again. But then I learned, never say never in this industry, because my second book that was published is called The Walled City. And I initially tried to start writing it with like magical elements and stuff into it, but it's based off of the Kowloon Walled City in Hong Kong that was destroyed in the early 90s. And it is very dystopian-esque within itself. And so it has that very genre-y feel, but it doesn't have any magic. So that was, I feel like, my one story that wouldn't have a sci-fi magical element to it, but everything else since then has.
That's so, I love like all of the answers and what the backgrounds. Oh my gosh, it's so good. Okay, so we have 2 questions from the audience. The first one is, when you're writing, do you envision your ideal reader, or do you write for yourself, or some combination, perhaps?
Oh, I write for myself because I'm one of those awful people that laughs at my own jokes. But at my desk, I mean, nobody has to see.
Oh, yeah.
And then I crack myself. And my husband is also a writer, and he used to work with a guy who would write jokes and laugh, and they shared an office, and it drove him nuts. And Chris will be in there, and he'll be like, I don't want to say the guy's name, but he'll be like, "You're doing it up, aren't you?" Just ask like, "Yeah, I've got a bad case of this guy's name right now." So yeah, it's for me, all for me. So
I'm very much the same as Julia. I kind of didn't realize it until after I think a lot of times I write, it's to fill that gap of, what these things that I'm interested in, or this theme that I'm interested in, like time travel, like what would that look like within kind of my personal ideal? And then, you cross your fingers and you hope other people will like it too. But at the same time, I think the more you do it, at least for me, even though I'm writing for myself and stories that I know I would enjoy, I also try to kind of create a separate self that's like the more objective reader self, and just to be able to look at it much more kind of coldly of like, okay, I love this, because I just happen to find X, Y, and Z interesting. But like as a reader, does this structure hold up? Does this move? Do these characters, do what they're supposed to be doing? And are they engaging? And so, I mean, I think it would be, I can't just purely selfishly pursue only kind of the stories that I like without also considering the fact that, in a best case scenario, there's also going to be an audience and people will read them. So, but I don't write for the audience. It's more like, I think it's finding that Venn diagram of here are the things I love and where's going to be that overlap where other people will, I can introduce them to it in a way that they'll also kind of be able to find it captivating.
Mm-hmm. That's the fun rewriting part.
Like
where you go, this joke has got to go. It's only making me laugh.
I'm so curious, Ryan, you're the one who has published the most books of us. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to tell you what my agent said, and you reflect on it. But my agent warned me before my first book came out. I was working on a second book, and she's like, just write as much as you can now, because once you've been published, you'll have this new weight of the expectation of a readership, and you'll start to hear other people's voices in your heads because you'll know how they reacted to the first one. Mm-hmm. And for some writers, that's fine, but for others, it can be like it really screw with your writing process and your time. And I found that I'm trying. You have a story that you're desperate to tell, and that's why you write, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't even sit down and start it. But I definitely have a different, I have to shut a lot more mental doors in my writing process now than I used to before. And Ryan, I'm wondering, has that gotten better for you or worse? Or is it, do you agree? Did that happen to you? What's your experience?
So I did write a lot before my first book was published. It took maybe 3.5 or 4 years from my initial deal to when my first book came out. So I was able to write about my first 4 books were written pre the first one being published. And then then after it's published and then you start getting everyone's opinion about everything. And there's also like the promotion and like, you know, if you're lucky enough to be able to like go and do events and go on, you know, tours and stuff and traveling, and all of that chips away at the writing time, and also just your mental, just like the magic that it takes to create. And so I have really had to learn over the past 8 or 9 years now, it's been, to really just take a step back from like the business side of things and try to figure out, okay, what is art and what is just for me and what is the business and for the readers, and to delineate from that, and just have projects that are just for me that I'm protecting, and then, you know, projects that are for business. And so there have definitely been some pitfalls and missteps along the way, and shelved manuscripts and, you know, stuff like that. But I think for me, the most important thing is learning, like, you don't have to be on the internet all the time. Like, you don't have to be constantly engaged in your Twitter feed, because that will destroy your soul. Yeah. And just like taking a step back, Freedom is a fantastic app on the computer. I input that a lot. And also just like keeping down notes of things. One of my good friends and favorite authors, Lainey Taylor, she keeps a document called like things that set my brain on fire. And it's just like ideas in the world that she just like, it's little things like hummingbirds or glaciers, or, you know, little things that just kind of immediately put a zing in your brain when you think about them. So I've also started keeping notes like that. And it really helps kind of like stir the creative pot when you want to sit down and try a new idea. And yeah, so it's little things like that. And just reminding yourself that, like, yes, the work is important, but also it's not that important. In the vein of Elizabeth Gilbert and her Big Magic book. So
Love that book.
Yeah.
Okay. The last question from the audience is, and I feel like this one could be, I don't know, maybe I feel like you're either gonna have an immediate answer or you'll need like a few minutes to think about it. But who are your favorite female literary characters of all time and why?
Ooh, I have an answer right off the top of my head.
Perfect.
Have you ever read I Capture the Castle?
Oh, yeah.
By Dodie Smith. Oh my
Yeah.
God, I love that narrator so much. And I didn't read that book. I was probably 50 before I read that book. I was like, why did I not have this when I was a teenager? It was around, you know? It's such a good book. And she's just so, she just goes on with her life and doesn't really care what other people expect for her. I loved it. So anyway, that's me. Somebody else now.
I'm worried that I've actually recommended this book already to this group of people, but I love The Westing Game. I reread it at least once a year. In my day job, I'm a crime fiction editor, and it's just it's a middle grade novel that's a mystery, but it's like perfectly plotted, 180 pages, 16 characters. Like, it's so concise. It's just like this beautiful little thing. But there's only, even though it's a middle grade novel, there's only one young character. There's a 13-year-old girl named Turtle Wexler.
Oh, Turtle, yeah.
And I think when I first discovered it, the first time I read it, I was 10 years old, and you know, Turtle was the character that I most connected to. But every year as I reread it, I find her more complex as a character, and the other 15 adult characters as well. Their complexity also grows. But I think that's a really, really neat book, and that's definitely one I return to again and again. And this is so lazy, but I have to say, I'm sorry, Anne of Green Gables, I just can't. I'm addicted to Anne of Green Gables. Just for, you know, the other nerds in the room.
For me, I think I don't have. I think of more authors that write female characters that are, for me, kind of. I like complex, difficult, even sometimes hard to love characters that feel real. And Margaret Atwood was the first author who I discovered that wrote those characters that just, you know, they get under your skin, like Cat's Eye, The Robber Bride. I mean, of course, The Handmaid's Tale. What's the historical fiction novel that recently was also made into a fantastic miniseries, Alias Grace. I just find that anything I read from her has these very just rich, uncompromising, fascinating, multifaceted women, and other authors that I feel also write female characters like that. And again, they're not necessarily women that I'd even like want to go get a beer with, but it's more kind of an admiration at the just what a fantastic character it is, because they are so fully fleshed out. And Gillian Flynn and Lionel Shriver are two other fantastic female authors that write female characters that sometimes are just, and Gillian Flynn, especially her thrillers, those women, a lot of those women can be tough to root for and get behind, but my goodness, they're so fascinating. I'm like behind them every step of the way just because they're so well drawn. And Lionel Shriver, the same way. Like, I think it's something I'm also trying to experiment with. Like, I've talked to other female authors. There seems to be, I feel like, more pressure on women to write likable female characters. And really, unless you're writing a thriller, it's hard to get away with, writing a character that has flaws and, or that isn't the straight up villain of your story. So that's something that I'm trying to look at with what I'm working on now too, that, it's not about kind of, okay, make sure that everybody is like getting behind her and rooting for her. But for me, it's like, as long as this character is capturing your attention, and as long as you want to read all about what she is doing and know more about her, then I think that's more important than liking her. So for me, that's something I look for in books as well.
Yeah, so I was like obsessed with reading as a kid. My parents, their television broke when I was 7, and they just like didn't replace it for 3 years. So that's what I did, was I went to bed and I read a book for like 2 hours before turning the lights out. And one of the very first series that I really like could see myself in was the Abhorsen trilogy by Garth Nix. And the first book in that is called Sabriel. And the main character, that's her name, Sabriel. And she is a necromancer who battles the dead with 7 bells. And really just, I think it was one of the first times that I'd seen a book that was only about a single female character going on her own into like a fantasy adventure. Like usually there's like, there's some sort of like, there's a guy main character, there's something else going on, but she kind of just goes on her own over the wall, and then meets a magical cat and all of these things. But I just loved that books and that series so much that I actually named my daughter Sabriel after that character. So yeah.
As you started telling the story, I was like, oh, the
yeah.
I was like,
yeah. Oh, connections. Yes, it's true.
So this is not like the annals of favorite literary characters, because I only just read it, but it's so good. Have any of you read American Spy by Lauren Wilkerson? It's so good. Yeah, and the main character, it's told in it is a thriller, but it's told in a first person point of view, from a woman who is working for the FBI, and her sister mysteriously died, and she gets recruited by the CIA, and it's in the 80s. So it's a kind of all of the kind of like freedom movements happening in Africa. It's so well done. Really interesting narrator that I would recommend off the top of my head. I read all the time, and I think because like for my job, I read a lot of mysteries and thrillers, and it becomes work. So whenever I read one that isn't work and it pops like this book did, I'm like, this is a really special book.
Yeah.
We got a comment from the audience that they loved all the answers, and also and I loved American Spy.
Yeah, so good. So good.
So that's got us at about an hour. So I think it's a good stopping point. Thank you guys so much for joining us. This has been super fascinating. I'm excited about all the books coming out that we heard about, and everyone who's listening. We have all the authors' books here at the store too that you can get from us. Yeah, thank you guys. And I hope you all had nice independent bookstore days where you are as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to, really all of the indie bookstores that I remember when I first kind of started this author thing that a publisher said, indie booksellers are the lifeblood of the writing and, reading community. And I've really just, this past year, I've seen it so much. And I'm so grateful for how much we get from booksellers and anything that we could do to give you that support back.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. Bye, guys. Nice to talk to humans.
Yeah.
Outside of my head.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
How do we hang up?
There's a little hang up button at the bottom.
Bye, ladies. Thanks again.
Bye. Thank you.
I don't know. You guys. Oh, there it is. Okay. Bye.